question to you is, who owns the value proposition? Is it marketing? Is it the business leader? Like, who owns it?
There needs to be a general management function in any business that owns the value proposition and everything that's involved, all the assets and all the processes and all the partnerships outside the company that impact whether or not and the profitability with which that value proposition is in fact delivered. So in a organization that has multiple businesses, there ought to be a team with a general manager that has the bottom line responsibility for each one of those businesses. And in my view, that means bottom line fundamental responsibility for determining and evolving over time what the value proposition is we're going to deliver and how we're going to deliver it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so, you know, we may have on you know, watching us right now, marketers who, you know, they've gone through some courses on value proposition. They've potentially read your book on value proposition, and they have come to the conclusion that, you know what, we don't have one. We don't have a value proposition, and in some sense, maybe they don't have that much control over the value. Like, what advice would you give someone out there sitting in that circumstance? I don't have a value proposition. Where can I start? You know, how can I begin convincing my...
Well, first off, any business ought to get together. If there's a general manager somewhere in sight, it would be nice to get together with that general manager and the key functional managers. Marketing nor R&D nor any of the individual functions, in my view, if they are separate individual functions, ought to be thinking through an issue like the value proposition alone. The whole point is to get everybody on the same page. We started with the idea that management theory very rightly has all along said we need to integrate all the functions around the same purpose. I'm only suggesting the way to define that purpose is in terms of the value proposition rather than the product. But the point is to get everybody on the same page. So none of the functions should own that. I don't want marketing to think this makes marketing unimportant.
Right.
It doesn't. But marketing shouldn't be the only one that deals with the value proposition. And in fact, too often, you start talking about the value proposition, you talk about the customer, people say, well, yeah, we got marketing takes care of that because the marketing takes care of the customer. That's the problem, and I think people have recognized that in marketing for a long time. You can't just have the marketing department worrying about the customer. It's too important for just marketing to be worrying about it. You need everybody to be worrying about it.
Ultimately, you have marketing trying to oftentimes solve a problem with the product itself, with the business strategy itself.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, the way I'm trying to talk about value proposition is it just isn't exclusively at all a marketing problem. And the problem has been traditionally, in part, that businesses and theory to some extent have tended to say, well, stuff that's about the customer, that's really, really important, and we stick it over here on the right end of the business system called the marketing and sale and communication. And yeah, it belongs there, but it also belongs in the rest of the business where I'm making the product that's going to actually have value or not to the customer and where I'm providing service. So all of that has to be oriented around the value proposition, and you need all the functions agreeing on that. The way to get functional integration is not to decide which function is most powerful, although you can get there that way. The better way is to get everybody to agree once and for all what the value proposition is we're going to deliver, and let's have every debate on whether to increase our investment in this plant or develop another addition to our product line or change our distribution or change our advertising or to sell online in a different way. All those arguments ought to be being made around what's the best way to deliver the same value proposition. The reality is if you go into an organization, if you feel like your organization doesn't have a value proposition, don't feel too alone. Most organizations, if you go in and say, what's the value proposition, and you ask people from 4 or 5 different functions, you'll get 4 or 5 different answers. Maybe some will say, I don't know what it is, but most likely you'll get an answer, but it won't be the same answer. That's your fundamental starting point. You've got to get to the same definition of what the value proposition is. Now, how do you get to what the right value proposition ought to be? That's a question of remembering who we're talking about here, which is the customer. Right. And so the point is to go back and, again, I put down the idea of simply writing down what the customer says and go do it. And yesterday somebody came up to me and said, are you really saying we shouldn't listen to the customer? And I'm not saying that at all. I am saying stop listening to the customer and become the customer. And what I mean by that is not really to ignore the customer, but to more profoundly, fundamentally respect and understand the customer by trying to see their set of experiences, their world, their problems, their opportunities through their eyes, the way they see it, and then say, how could that world be made better in what we do? That's taking the customer more seriously than asking them what to do. But it's saying that the point is, we ought to be able to define a difference between what happens today and what would happen if we could make it happen for that customer. If we can make that happen profitably, that's a route to making a lot of money. I can't go and ask the customer what that is because they're not likely to have a coherent answer to that. But I can ask them what they did last Thursday what did you actually do? If you're a business, let me talk to maybe 20 people in the business and understand what typically happens, all the processes. And what I'm looking for is what goes on here today, whether it's in a consumer's life or a business, that's imperfect from the standpoint of what they're trying to accomplish. Nobody has everything perfect, so there's always suboptimal aspects of people's experiences. Try to collect those, analyze those, and then say, kind of like a 12-year-old, a little bit naively, well, what if I kind of magic wand style made a much better scenario? What would that look like? Now, try to stay away from science fiction and making up stuff that's utterly impossible, but try not to be too constrained by what we already know the customer won't let us do and the corporation won't let us do and the competition won't let us do. Simply improve today's scenario substantially in some imagined time frame, and then say, now, let's start bringing reality into this and ask, how close could we get to making that happen? In answering that, you're getting at what may be a new value proposition, and it's different than what you'll get to if you say, what are we good at? How strongly can we position our product and our capabilities and our competencies? It's also different than what you'll get if you say to the customer, how should we sell to you? What is it you want? Yep. What should we give you? It's getting to a different answer by saying, what's it like to be them? What's imperfect about their life, their experience, their business? What would it look like if it was a lot better? And what would it take for us to give them something better than that? And by the way, I have to take into account somewhere in there the fact that competition is not a stationary problem. They're going to move and they're going to offer alternatives and they're thinking about these issues too. And if we make an improvement and bring a better scenario to the customer, competition may imitate the same thing tomorrow morning and do it at 5 cents less, and then we aren't anywhere. So we have to think through what are the competing alternatives, and at the end of the day end up, have I got a value proposition that I can conceive of that I think we might be able to deliver if we put enough attention to it profitably better than the competition or any other alternative?